This is February the 27th, 2022. And basically, I want to, I guess, go ahead and kind of do an update on the situation in the Ukraine war, I guess we call it right now. Um, and basically, there are some new developments here that are kind of interesting. For a while, it's kind of hard to see, grasp exactly what's happened, but it does look as if it's that the Russians have definitely run into some major resistance, and the Ukrainians are fighting very effectively in terms of their army, and of course the civilians are mobilizing for civilian resistance. And so this is all, it's thrown Putin's grand plan into chaos. I guess it's not chaos, but at least it's not working out very good. In fact, strategically, this looks to be a major defeat for him, because regardless of what actually happens in Ukraine, he's definitely mobilized NATO in a way that it hasn't been mobilized in a long time, maybe since 1980s or something. And so as a result, if his objective was to do something more than Ukraine, I don't think it's going to come out that good, so to speak. And in fact, I think a lot of that is a little bit of fear and hysteria. I've been hearing a lot of, I think, a little over-the-top comments overall about the subject. That is to say that he's going to move on to Poland or Balkans, or I think maybe if Ukraine really fell in 2 days or something, that would theoretically be a possibility. But in practice, I think they're getting a lesson, and that is not an easy thing to do in today's world. The populations today are not that submissive, to say the least. And of course, the big development of the day is the announcement by Russia that they're putting their strategic nuclear forces on a higher state of alert. I'm not sure exactly what that means in terms of what I'm familiar with about our strategic forces, but I could go into that a little bit. I've really not talked about the nuclear dimension much in these videos, and how that could come into play at some point. But if you like these videos, please subscribe. A like is appreciated to help out with the algorithm, and any comments are appreciated. You can forward links to friends or anybody that's interested. Okay, yeah. So at any rate, as I say, we seem to see that even in the border cities, I was at Kharkov, I think up there, it's near the Russian border, not too far from it. They're facing pretty fierce resistance from the Ukrainian military, and they've yet to even take that. They seem to have moved through the Chernobyl exclusion zone and stirred up some radioactive dust. And then the main push is on the outskirts of Kiev, and I guess that's how you pronounce it. There's a Russian pronunciation and a Ukrainian one, so, and I think the Kiev is the Ukrainian dialect version. Anyhow, so they're and they've had probing forces that have been battling for a couple of days on the outskirts, which seem to be apparently repulsed, but they seem to be trying to kind of see what they can do. And then they destroyed a major fuel oil storage facility outside the city, presumably deliberately. I think that some of the things you're seeing may be just a case of errant missiles that miss their target and hit something that's a civilian apartment complex, or it could be deliberate to create fear and chaos. It's hard to know. There's always about a certain amount of collateral damage, even in these conflicts, so you never know whether it's deliberate or not. It's not intense enough to be a full-scale, counter civilian attack or anything. In fact, my opinion is that the part of the failure of the Russian attack was it was based on a presumption that they would somehow be kind of welcomed a little bit more than they were. They apparently had a total misread on the attitude of the people there, of the resolve of the Ukrainian military and the political structure, and that may be the phenomenon where you have the central leader, surrounded by yes men who don't dare to say you're wrong about anything, and therefore he gets bad advice, and that could be the problem. I do notice our intelligence chief was a little bit hesitant to say what he wanted in the meeting, and he was scolded. So maybe he's the one that was most aware of that they were running into some real problems. On the other hand, you're dealing with a very powerful military that has not even committed the bulk of its forces yet. And so there is a possibility that they'll try to simply blast their way through this. And while the earlier policies were probably based on the idea of not inflicting indiscriminate civilian casualties in order to be able to have some kind of a positive relationship with the people after they, quote, won, now that it's clear that they're not going to win easily, they're faced with basically different choices, one of which would be to try to exit this thing in the most faith-saving way possible. And there are offers of impending negotiations between the Ukrainian government and the Russians. And I think that might be the possibility that the Russians might try to negotiate some sort of a ceasefire and some kind of conditions from the Ukrainians in return for the withdrawal of Russian troops from their territory. And there might be some nuances about what really happens in those two areas in the east. But even there, that's and of course the issue of Crimea is always there. I think that the Russians won't cave on at all. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is a serious escalation for the Russians to use massive force to blast their way through. There's even been some talk now of potential chemical or nuclear weapons being used, get into the whole internationally prohibited WMD area, and that's possible. I mean, I tend to doubt that. And as far as the strategic nuclear threat, I think that's mainly kind of signaling, and it isn't something the United States hasn't done in the past either. I mean, for instance, during the Yom Kippur War in '73, the United States went on worldwide nuclear alert for a day or so and prepared all of our bombers and everything, and as the Russians were threatening to send paratroopers into the Middle East to confront the Israelis, and as they quote, peacekeeping force, unquote. They use that term here too, didn't they? And that apparently was partly resulted in dissuading them from doing so, and then they got in, didn't happen. But I mean, that has happened before, so this is part of the things. One thing that could be considered here, and I don't know what they're doing exactly, but the Russian nuclear forces are a little different structure they're similar to the United States, but they also have some differences. And that is, there's a significant amount of their land-based system is road mobile rather than fixed silo positions. Fixed silo things are largely on alert most of the time anyhow. The only question is the actual missile readiness, and that's the U.S. systems are highly ready most of the time because of the way they're designed. And I think historically, and I don't know where the Russians are now, they didn't keep all of them at the same level of readiness. And therefore, when they went alert, they would go to a higher readiness so that their appropriate guidance systems were up and ready and so forth and that kind of thing. So that's possibly at the road mobile systems. That might mean they move them out of their normal peacetime storage areas and move them into remote sites, camouflaged, so that they're not easily targeted. And that might be a possibility. I'm not sure if they're taking that precaution either, but to give you an idea of what could be involved. The other issue is that there's a lot of other nuclear capabilities that actually both countries have. The Russians actually have more of it than we have because the U.S. policy over the years has been to decommission most of this stuff. But the Russians haven't gone nearly as far in that area. So they do have a lot of lower yield tactical type battlefield weapons, for instance. And I tend to doubt they're going to use that in Ukraine, but you never know. I mean, their initial attack, they drove through a nuclear waste exclusion zone. So not to be, that's, I mean, it would if there's a area where there's a real strong point of resistance, that would be one way to try to break it down, I guess. But they would be the normal international ramifications would be notable. I think what's more significant on here, I don't get too deep into that subject, but there is a question of there was some discussion from the Ukrainians demanding a no-fly zone be put over all of Ukraine by NATO. Well, what they're really asking for there is that NATO goes into air war against the Russian Air Force, right? I mean, because the Russian Air Force currently controls that airspace. So I don't think they're just going to leave because somebody tells them to. So you would end up in air battles. And if the NATO air forces, mainly the U.S., but don't knock the RAF and the German air forces and so forth, were to commit themselves to this battle, and particularly if we bring in our new fifth generation planes, F-22 and the new F-35s, the Russian Air Force would be in a world of hurt. And that's where you could get into the area of escalation, because if they don't choose to lose their Air Force, there's an open combat. One way to do it would be to do missile attacks on the bases from when the planes fly, which are comparatively soft targets, actually. And if conventional bombs weren't sufficient, low-yield nukes would destroy those bases and then put us in a very delicate position. What do we do back about it? And we would seem to have an imperative to retaliate, but we obviously wouldn't want our whole countries destroyed. So they might be willing to, do something like that in that particular scenario, which is one reason why I think that nobody's going to try to put a no-fly zone over Ukraine. But I just go through some of the details. These are all, not to be scary here, I think the probability of any of this happening is very small. I don't think the situation is that desperate. However, you can on the one hand portray Putin as being a madman who's out of control, on the other hand saying he's going to behave perfectly rationally if he's about to lose. And so there are risks here in making him lose too much. In fact, actually having him lose kind of moderately is probably the best outcome. That is to say, he gives up on his designs on Ukraine being conquered and gets something in return for it, probably neutrality of Ukraine, which is what I've been advocating all along anyhow. That is not part of NATO. I think that would maybe, compared to escalating this thing to a level that will make the current sanction regimes that are being imposed on Russia, more widespread and more permanent, let's say, pulling back on now and accepting something like that, and then he would, of course, take the perhaps deceptive point of view that that was his intention all along, right? Probably not true, but it would be a face-saving way that Russia could get out of it and withdraw their military and end this thing. The other way it could end would be him to escalate and go on a long siege-type warfare. It would drag on for a long period of time and just harden all the positions in the world against him. And people are going to start thinking, gee, we're too dependent on him for energy and we need to develop our own resources, Germany's probably thinking, maybe we shouldn't be this reliant on natural gas from Russia anymore. And that's going to have long-term effects. I mean, that doesn't go away even when the war ends. People are going to be moving in that direction more, I think. Or maybe considering that shutting down all the nuclear plants in Germany was a big mistake, for instance. I mean, these are issues that play in this whole thing. And also, of course, we've had some more economic sanctions in this so-called SWIFT system on the banking and so forth. And I'm kind of wondering, though, what role cryptocurrencies are going to start playing in trade with Russia in the future here. I mean, if you can't do regular bank transactions, it would seem like that Russia might move to want payments in cryptocurrency, which would be something that would be much harder to control, I think, than the normal banking wiring transfers that they're trying to block. It's also interesting that the one thing they're not blocking is the payments for Russian energy, which even we are taking right now, which is kind of, so, and we're not nearly as dependent as Europe is, but, if we were to cut off Russian oil imports, we'd probably pay, another $1 a gallon for gas. Not a nice thing, but we could afford that, I think. Germany, on the other hand, totally shutting off all energy resources from Russia at this point would absolutely wreck them economically, throw them into depression probably. And there's no readily available alternatives, I don't think. In the long run, yes, you can go to liquefied natural gas, but that has, do the ships that transport actually exist right now? Do the depots receive it? Are they in sufficient quantities to make that replacement for the pipelines? And I tend to doubt that. So, but in the long run, by this action that Russia took, it's going to move a lot of people in Europe to thinking about making those changes in an expeditious way as it can be done. So, anyway, that's kind of the way I see it right now. I wouldn't panic over the nuclear stuff, but I just want to kind of outline kind of what I see it as being, and also, and I think this is maybe a psychological ploy. It's scary, and therefore you use it. But if there's a limit to what he can do that isn't more harmful to him than helpful. I mean, actually launching a cyber war against the U.S. might really backfire big time or just hurt both sides. It's hard to know. It doesn't look like a cyber warfare against Ukraine has even been able to knock the Ukrainian internet off the air, and now Elon Musk has put up one of his Starlink satellites to help Ukraine communicate. So, I mean, some of these tactics, might sound better in theory than they are in practice. Anyway, that's kind of about where it is for now. I have links to my various social media accounts, the addresses of them down there, and which ones they are. At any rate, that's kind of it for today. And I'll move on to the next issue.